Hello and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. This video is my review of the ninth in the series of Avon paperbacks based around the legendary Phantom, or otherwise known as the Ghost Who Walks, the immortal comic strip character created by Lee Falk and who premiered originally in 1936 and is really part of the massive amount of pulp era characters that inspired practically everything we know and love about comic book superheroes. The Phantom is generally regarded as the first costumed and masked comic superhero in the traditional sense we think of, and was a great influence on Batman and practically every other costumed superhero that followed. The Avon novels are really interesting because not only was it especially rare at the time to have novels based on comic characters, especially newspaper comic strip characters, but it also meant that you could have a variety of authors take pre-existing story arcs from the comic strips and expand upon them or combine them or really turn them into kind of different stories in a way because you have a whole novel to play with. And the best of these that I've read so far are actually written by the creator Lee Falk himself, and this is another one that Falk wrote, and you can tell even if you didn't know the author, because some of these were ghost written and a number are under pseudonyms, but most were written by Ron Goulart under a pseudonym actually. But you can tell the ones that Lee Falk wrote himself because you have the creator of the character and the writer of all the strips in the dailies and the Sundays for all of these years. So you have the person who created all of this getting to play around with these stories and his own character in book form. And so the Lee Falk books of the Avon series have the most heart, the most spirit, the most humor, and are the most vivid, I think, of reading all of these. There are 15 Avon novels, and again, Falk only wrote certain ones, so you read others that are still enjoyable adventures, but then you get to another that he wrote, and then you're like, whoa, okay, yeah, this is, I'm back to one of his. And Killer's Town is really interesting because it has a phenomenal story hook. The story hook is you have a gangster who's essentially exiled from the United States for various reasons. No country will accept him, but he winds up, through his cronies, purchasing a piece of land that nobody really wants that's sort of in between different countries. So it's sort of, it's like the intersection of different national borders, and nobody really wants it, and it's the site of an old ghost town. And they wind up purchasing it for nothing and then turning it into a walled-off criminal paradise for all the criminals of the world to basically escape to when the law is after them, because they can go to this place and it acts like its own sovereign nation. And it's an incredible plot setup that's done really, really well and is extremely effective because, of course, no police force can actually go inside here legally because they've set themselves up as a sovereign nation of criminals. So it becomes a safe haven, except for the fact that the killer head is a notorious gangster who has it all fixed for himself. So all these criminals show up with their various loot from all these robberies and things, and they have to pay a tax, and it kind of sort of almost becomes in some ways like a luxury prison for all of these criminals. They don't know quite what the cost that's going to be exacted for their stay in Killer's Town. So it's a beautifully structured story, wonderfully pulpy, and has a nice bit of suspense because no one can go into this place. And it just so happens to be located in and around the nation of Bengala, the home of the Phantom. And the Jungle Patrol, that is the source of law and order in Bengala and the jungles, they can't legally go in. And they're stymied, but to up the stakes even more, the daughter of the head of the Jungle Patrol, Colonel Weeks, winds up being captured and kept and held prisoner inside Killer's Town. So this just further torments the head of the Jungle Patrol. Now his own daughter is held there, and he's about to snap and charge in, guns blazing, and probably be obliterated by the pretty notable defenses that are in the walled-off city sovereign state of criminals. So this, of course, is the perfect setup because you know there's only one man who can solve this crisis, which of course is the Ghost Who Walks himself. And when the Phantom intervenes and actually enters Killerstown, all hell breaks loose, and it is delicious to see how the Phantom basically has to take this entire operation apart bit by bit, piece by piece, man by man, using only his wits, his fists, and his 245s. It's a beautiful story. It is so much ridiculous fun. But interestingly, we actually transition out of this because the whole sort of final act becomes almost a different story entirely. It becomes a sort of manhunt through the jungle of the sort of last of the criminals for who were not caught or killed or captured in Killerstown. And the Phantom basically has to track this guy through the jungle, and it becomes a one-on-one manhunt. And it just so happens that this character he's chasing after is completely psychotic and has a significant body count that he's left a trail of throughout the entire book. So, it just so happens that the one guy that gets away and is let loose in the jungle just so happens to be a psychotic murderer. It's an interesting sort of switch, and when you look up the actual information that's out there about this is actually sort of a blending of two previously existing stories in the strips. So basically what Lee Falk did was take the central conceit and main part of the story from an original strip story arc that was called Bulletstown, and then combined it with a story entitled The Killer, which is essentially what the sort of final act of the book resolves. So this is one of the Avon stories that actually blends together more than one of the original newspaper strip stories. And it does it rather well. You wouldn't exactly know that they were two different stories originally because this murderer character is put inside the book very early and is kept an active character and participant throughout the story, and actually becomes sort of the primary villain after the sometime after the halfway point, and then sets up the final act. But it is a bit of a switch in terms of I love the central concept of the sort of enclave of the sovereign nation filled of criminals trying to get away from the world, run by another criminal who's scamming all of them and becoming even more rich by doing so. I love that concept so much. I wish the whole book had been that. And it makes sense when you find out that these are actually two different stories that have sort of been woven together, that it kind of makes sense why there's such it's not abrupt, but it definitely is a shift from going from the wonderful Killerstown to all of a sudden being sort of jungle manhunt for the last stragglers who got away. But that does keep the book interesting and investing, and actually quite gripping. So I do think this is one of the best of the Avon novels. In fact, I'd put it right up there with my other favorites so far of the first book, and that which kind of tells the origin story of the Phantom and expands upon it, and book 6, The Mysterious Ambassador. And of course, all three of these books were written by Lee Falk, so it kind of makes sense that my favorites of the Avon series are the ones that Lee Falk wrote himself. And this is nothing against the other authors, because all the books are wonderful fun, but when you have the original creator and primary writer of the character for many decades writing some of these and getting to expand upon it in novel form and play around with some of his own stories, then it's obviously going to be stronger than other people being sort of hired on to write stories themselves. So it's bit of an unfair comparison, but this is an absolute blast, and I would recommend this to anyone who's looking for a fun pulpy adventure or a fun pulp hero story. Even if you know nothing about the character of the Phantom, this is a wonderful read. It's an absolute blast, and it belongs on anyone's bookshelf who loves a good adventure story. Now, this is the Hermes Press reprint that's done in the same nice uniform design as all of these. They did reprint the whole series. This is done in a slightly oversized, I guess technically this is like a larger trade paperback, but it's kind of done more like a comic in a way. It's not the full comic trade size, but it is a little oversized, which does give it a slight premium feel to it. As the matching white spine that goes along with all of theirs, so these match on a bookshelf, and you just have all 15 with these matching white spines. And then the rear has the original blurb with a reprint of the cover artwork. The artwork is beautiful, and as all of these was done by the same artist, George Wilson, who captures the story beautifully, and it gives it that definite flavor of a 1970s men's adventure paperback, which is what these were. If you do find the original, it will of course be, a smaller 1970s Avon paperback, but those are unfortunately very highly collectible, pretty rare, and do cost quite a bit. So getting a complete set of all 15 is so pricey that these rather affordable reprints, I think, are the better option. But if you ever find any of these in the wild, they're so incredible and worth your time. But the original printings are actually quite rare. This is still, it's not a terribly long story. None of these are terribly long books. This runs 159 pages in this printing. And what they've done, because this is a bigger book, they've also spread the text block out some more. So it's actually very easy on the eyes. It's nice to read, and because it's a bigger, more premium feeling book, it's quite nice to hold in the hand and actually and read instead of the original smaller paperback. So you do get some sort of nice bonus out of having the reprints. Also, they not only include the iconic prologue telling you the origin of the Phantom, beautifully written by Lee Falk. This is reprinted in all of these. But starting with this one, they add another article that is glorious. This is actually by a lecturer at the Sorbonne, an actual academic talking about the genius of the Phantom and the need for pulp fiction and adventure stories, but with the beautiful title of "With the Phantom, Everything is Possible Except Boredom." This is a beautiful essay written about, again, the genius of the Phantom and the incredible need in life for adventure stories and what that does for people. And it concludes with, Lee Falk has taught us to dream, which is something no school in the world can teach. It's just a beautiful inclusion, and I absolutely love this essay, and this is continued and kept along with the origin story and all of the other volumes. So I love the fact that they had those and they kept those, and I love the fact that there was an actual Sorbonne lecturer who wrote this beautiful little essay about why the Phantom is so important and why the adventure story is true art. So that is the Hermes Press reprint of the 9th Avon Phantom novel, Killerstown, which I think is one of the best in the series of Avon novels. I absolutely adore this book. It is so much incredible fun. If you're curious about any of these, or you happen to stumble across some, I would recommend trying the Lee Falk written stories first, because you have the creator writing them, and of them so far, I really think this is another absolute standout. So again, I would recommend this to any comic fans, any pulp hero fans, any adventure novel fans. This is just a beautiful, fun adventure novel that does have some nice gripping elements, a beautiful story conceit, and it's another incredible adventure of the legendary Ghost Who Walks himself. You can still purchase a copy of this from Hermes directly, and I will leave a link in the description. It's always great to help out independent publishers wherever possible by ordering directly from them. And they do frequently have sales and sometimes run bundles of their Phantom books and even their Avon reprints. Again, the reprints are a pretty good idea because the original copies are very collectible and very rare, and unfortunately were never reprinted. So these are the first and only reprints of them. So I will leave the links in the description should you want to purchase a copy of this, which, again, I would strongly recommend to anyone who loves adventure fiction and pulp heroes. So I will continue in my series doing little videos on each of these. I did purchase all 15 of the reprints and have just so incredibly enjoyed reading these, looking for more Phantom adventures because I've just been always wanting to know more about the character, and I've finally started cherry picking various elements and various Phantom stories and different comic runs and things, and I just had an absolute blast with these. These are a perfect gateway into the world of the Phantom because they are drawing directly from the original newspaper strips and also retelling some of those stories, and a good number of them were written by the creator, Lee Falk himself, so that makes it absolutely perfect if you've never experienced the character before, or maybe you've just seen the 1996 film and you wonder what the actual stories are like. I would definitely recommend trying the Avon reprints from Hermes. I hope my babblings about the magic of the Phantom, comics, book collecting, and pulp heroes have been at least somewhat fun and informative. And as always, please do keep supporting independent publishers and bookstores wherever possible. Keep reading, happy phantoming, and thank you ever so much for watching.